Good day. You can see from the slideshow that appeared for a split second on your screen that we are about to start. So let me say a few introductory words. In the meantime, a few more people I see are joining, but let's start already with some housekeeping rules. First of all, I am Stineke Oenema. I am the Executive Secretary of UN Nutrition, and we are hosting today's event together with the International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI. I will be your moderator for this session, but before we really go into the content, I will take, as I said, a few minutes to cover some housekeeping issues. So if you can hear me now, if you can see me now, no action is needed. However, if you have issues troubling connecting on your computer, maybe you can close the Zoom application and join again. You can see information in the chat box. If you continue to encounter these difficulties, don't worry, we are recording the session and will make the recording available afterwards, as well as the slides. We will be doing this webinar for 1 hour and 30 minutes. There is a Q&A box. Feel free to type your questions there throughout the entire sessions, and the presenters will answer these towards the end of the session. Now I would like to introduce with pleasure our chair, UN Nutrition Chair, Dr. Yaoko Yamamoto, who is also the Assistant Director General of Universal Health Coverage and Healthier Population Division at WHO. Dr. Naoko, she will share some opening remarks and set the stage for today's discussion. Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, please, I invite to unmute yourself and kick off our digital event today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stineke, and distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues and friends. Thank you very much for joining this launching event. It is my pleasure to open this event, building on the momentum of the World Health Assembly and in the lead up to the UN Food System Summit. As Stineke has already introduced me, I'm speaking as the chair of the UN Nutrition, which is an inter-agency collaboration and coordination mechanism for nutrition. This is new entity ensures that nutrition efforts at global and country levels are aligned, mutually supportive, and well coordinated. It also enables the UN to speak with one voice on nutrition. Today, we launched the new UN Nutrition discussion paper on livestock-derived foods and sustainable healthy diet. I encourage you to read this paper together with the UN Nutrition discussion paper on aquatic foods launched in early May this year. Both papers highlighted the role of the diverse range of food from both terrestrial and aquatic sources in sustainable healthy diet. I'm joined by the author of the paper and an esteemed panel of experts from different constituencies, including UN nations and United Nations and private sector. This paper captures many nuances of the topic, contextualizing benefit and risk. It embraces the One Health model, recognizing that human, animal, and planetary health are interconnected, along with the virtue in fostering nutritional equity. Backed with evidence, the paper highlights examples from the various countries, such as Ecuador, Rwanda, and India. The paper acknowledges the nutrient profile of the livestock-derived foods beyond being a source of high-quality protein. It explains that how these foods contain highly absorbable forms of vitamins and minerals like vitamin A and iron that set them apart from plant-based alternatives. For this reason, this is important to eat livestock-derived food such as eggs at key life stages like pregnancy and early childhood, particularly in low resource settings. Some populations overconsume livestock-derived food. This can have negative consequences on both human health and the environment. However, animal type, scale of production, method influence the environmental footprint. Mixed system may even mitigate climate change and enable the achievement of SDG 2, 12, and 13. Improved production practices coupled with more investment in food hygiene across the livestock system could contribute to increased food safety. This could also protect the livelihood of millions of people around the world. We will learn how shift in consumption patterns can also be part of the solution. This is just a glimpse at this richness of the new paper. So let me stop. I cannot cover in 3 minutes here, but I would like to hand over Steneke Ramenia, the Executive Secretary of UN Nutrition. So Steneke-san is both contributed to the paper and also coordinate inputs from all members of the agency. So thank you again for all of you to join this launching event. So now I would like to hand over to Steneke-san. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. It's really my pleasure to be moderating this webinar as part of the WHO Health Talk Weeks. Just a few more of my thoughts on this paper as well. Livestock-derived foods can be such important building blocks of healthy diets, but at the same time, they have this delicate interface with human health and the environment. And today's conversation, why we are here together, we will unpack these various aspects of livestock-derived foods on the one hand, and also how they can contribute to the preparation for the UN Food System Summit and the pre-summit next month in July to ensure nutrition is prominently featured. But first of all, before we go into all the intricacies of the paper we are launching today, we will hear a keynote address by Dr. Jimmy Smith, the Director General of ILRI, followed by a presentation on the new UN Nutrition discussion paper. After that, we will invite panelists from IFAD, UN Environment, UNICEF, Ugandan Farm, and Action Track 2 of the UN Food System Summit, to share perspectives and experiences related to livestock-derived foods in the context of nutrition and One Health. Finally, of course, we will also engage with you and have hopefully very dynamic Q&A session where members of the audience, you can chime in with your thoughts and questions. So that can be through the Q&A box. So without further ado, Jimmy Smith, I invite you to take the floor. Currently the Executive Director of ILRI. Jimmy has also held a series of senior positions, including at the World Bank, where he led the bank's livestock portfolio. A master and a PhD in animal science, bringing in a wealth of experience in this particular area. Jimmy, please feel free to say a few words to introduce yourself personally or directly go into the content of your speech. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator, Dr. Yamamoto, distinguished colleagues. I'm really pleased to participate in today's launch of the UN discussions paper on livestock-derived foods and sustainable healthy diets, because it enlightens us on this important subject and presents me with an opportunity to enjoin the debates, perhaps we can say the controversies, surrounding animal source foods. The controversies arise from an underappreciation of the diverse role that livestock play. As I like to say, where you stand on an issue is a function of where you sit. Let me explain what I see from where I sit and hope that this provides some context for the focus of today's discussion around this excellent discussion paper. Of course, anything we say about food is bound to be controversial for some, because what we eat each day touches something individual and personal for every person. And food, of course, goes well beyond eating and has multiple other dimensions, cultural, social, and so on. Importantly for today, I want to highlight that beyond such multiple roles, the essence of our food is to nourish us, because one can be fed but not be nourished. The latest global figures, compounded by the global pandemic, speak all too loudly to us about the status of poverty and food and nutrition insecurity. The worsening global circumstances about food and nutrition security give urgency and added importance to today's launch of this paper on animal source foods. You have already heard Dr. Yamamoto say about the importance, even uniqueness of these foods. Dr. Lanati will have much more to say about it, so let me not attempt to steal her thunder. Let me, however, say that it is immutable that animal source foods currently play a critical role in nourishing us and can contribute even more, particularly in developing countries as populations grow there. The paper being launched today presents the evidence and make a compelling case. What perhaps stands in the way are the controversies around livestock-derived foods. So let me take this opportunity to address some of them. Of course, the one that springs to mind first is around the environment and particularly greenhouse gas emissions. Given the climate crisis, livestock, as with all sectors, must contribute to its alleviation. Livestock, particularly ruminants, do produce greenhouse gases. In low and middle income countries, where the demand for livestock-derived foods is growing fastest, emissions of greenhouse gas per unit of product, referred to as emissions intensity, is high. However, these can be massively cut by better feeding, genetics, and health interventions. If we were to do so, not only will emission intensities be cut, but fewer animals will be required to meet increasing demand over time. In our efforts to reduce emissions, indeed, if countries can include it in their nationally determined contributions at the heart of the Paris Agreement, we need accurate metrics to measure progress. That means using indicators developed in and for developing countries' livestock systems, not extrapolating as we do now, for example, from North America, Kenya, and so on. It also means using common life cycle boundaries to make sensible comparisons. For example, transport and livestock emissions are often compared, even though different life cycles are used. The oft-quoted 14.5% of livestock is based on a whole life cycle analysis from production all the way through to consumption. That is not the case for transport, where only direct emissions are calculated. On a direct emissions basis, transport accounts for 50%, while livestock accounts for 5%. Just a couple of weeks ago, ILRI, with multiple partners, launched a rangelands atlas. It shows that rangelands constitute 54% of the Earth's terrestrial surface, with 84% of these lands used for livestock production. And they are too dry, cold, or both to be used for crop production. These lands also present an incredible opportunity for carbon sequestration, and animals are a part of that. Another area of the controversy surrounds consumption of animal source foods and human health. As I've alluded above, for many, there are beneficial nutritional outcomes if more meat, milk, and eggs were readily available and consumed. Of course, that is not the case for everyone. And for those who consume too much, a reduction would have both health and potentially environmental benefits. Over 1 billion people depend directly or indirectly on livestock for their livelihoods. Women represent more than half of them. For them, livestock not only contribute income and food, but also provide manure for their crops, transport for their produce, and risk insurance for when times are hard or when emergency arises. So let me conclude as I started. Where you stand in an issue is a function of where you sit. I have attempted to highlight the opportunities and controversies around the very diverse livestock sector and the food it produces. I trust that what I've had to say would have allowed you to sit with me in the many places livestock occupy, particularly in the developing world. We must remember that the circumstances of those who eat too much are not the same as those who eat too little. So too are the different circumstances between those who make poor choice of food and those who have no choice of food. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. I listened carefully to your thoughts, and you carefully maneuvered around what we tried to say in the discussion paper. You did not take away any of what Laura will say in detail about the paper itself, but you carefully compared livestock sector with other sector. You alluded to the importance of innovation, the need for balance in consumption, as well as accessibility for the different population group. And most importantly, or very importantly, there's so many types of livestock production. We cannot just say put everything in one basket and say it's good or bad. No, we need to look at the context and start from there. So thank you so much for that very compelling opening speech. Let's move on now to our UN Nutrition discussion paper. And this will be presented by Dr. Laura Iannotti, who is the main author of the paper. She is Associate Professor of Public Health at Washington University in St. Louis. She is also Director of E3 Nutrition Lab and a visiting scientist with ILRI. She leads and has been leading projects in Haiti, Ecuador, and Kenya that test transdisciplinary approaches related to animal source foods. Well, as you can see, Laura is one of those few people who seeks out innovative approaches and partnerships for nutrition. Laura, over to you. I'm looking forward to your presentation of our UN Nutrition Livestock and Sustainable Healthy Diet paper. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really been a privilege to work closely with you, Stanika, and with the co-authors on this paper. It's also an honor to be on this panel with such esteemed experts. But I first want to say thank you to all who showed up for this webinar now or later. It really matters that you care about this issue and you want to be informed about this somewhat contentious issue. It is about life, death, and livelihoods for so many people around the world. Okay, next slide, please. So in this presentation, I'll essentially follow the outline of the UN discussion paper. I'll first start by giving you an introduction to the public discourse, talk to you about disparities in LDF consumption patterns in particular. Next, I'll spend most of my time on health and nutrition implications, largely because this is my area of expertise, talk to you about the nutrient bioavailability of LDFs and LDFs through the life cycle. Then I will touch lightly on the sustainable production of LDFs because other panelists will be handling more of this subject matter, and then conclude with the key messages from the UN discussion paper and the next steps that we propose for taking action. Next slide. So as Stanika mentioned, I'm director of the E3 Nutrition Lab at Washington University in St. Louis, and we do research to identify interventions that promote healthy growth and development in the most vulnerable populations around the world. And we have 3 E's to guide us: equitably accessed, evolutionarily appropriate, and environmentally sustainable. I describe this because it points to the role that I played in writing this UN paper, which was to provide the scientific perspective and infuse the evidence base around this very important issue. Next slide. LDFs, as relate to the environment and human health, have garnered the public's attention with some imbalance in the dialogue, as Dr. Smith mentioned. This has arisen largely from some seminal publications, including Livestock's Long Shadow, the Eat Lancet, article that has recently been published on planetary boundaries. There's indisputable evidence that LDF production systems contribute to climate change and chronic disease burden, but they can and should play a vital role in achieving Sustainable Development Goals 2, 12, and 13. Some of the voices have not been heard in this debate, in part because they're not the evidence base, in part because of their position in society. Children and women, one-fifth of all children around the world have stunted growth. On the other end of the spectrum, 5.6 are overweight, and that number is increasing. A third of all women of reproductive age are anemic, and hidden hunger or nutrient deficiencies are widely prevalent. Smallholder producers are another voice unheard. They produce an estimated 51 to 71% of nutrients globally and are disproportionately affected by climate change. Encompassing both of these groups are resource-poor populations coming from low-income countries and poor communities around the world. Next slide. These representative figures highlight LDF consumption disparities by context. So what you can see in the x-axis is longitudinal data over 5+ decades on apparent intakes, which comes from FAO food balance sheets in LDFs. On the y-axis, you see per kilocalories per capita per day. Globally, there has been increasing LDF consumption, notably for pig, poultry, meat, and eggs. In Europe, you see average consumption levels are considerably higher for milk especially, but across all LDFs. Southeast Asia has seen the greatest increase in LDF consumption, while sub-Saharan Africa has largely plateaued and even experienced some slight decline. Next slide. This map of poultry meat consumption as one example further illustrates consumption disparities. The varying green shades indicate varying levels across the world. Of course, this does not display the disparities that exist within countries as well. Next slide. So I'm transitioning now into the nutrition and health implications of LDFs. Next slide. I want to mention only briefly the evidence that shows the evolutionary importance of LDFs. There were anatomical differences that appeared with Homo erectus compared to other hominins that many people have attributed to diet change, in particular the introduction of animal source foods. These physical differences included the increase of brain size by 3 times the encephalization quotient. We were taller and had larger body mass as well. Some of these anatomical differences reversed in the Neolithic period to a lesser extent with the advent of agriculture. I'm leading a systematic review currently on child evolutionary diets from Homo erectus through early agriculture, and our preliminary findings show that animal source foods were always present in child diets of gatherer, hunter, fisher groups, together with a very diverse range of other foods depending on environment. Next slide. LDFs are nutrient dense and contain nutrients in highly bioavailable matrices. LDFs, first of all, I want to emphasize, comprise a vast array of foods, with differences in nutrient composition across and within species. Nutrient content may depend on animal food and animal nutrition. Even meat nutrients vary by tissue type, so muscle versus organ. In the UN discussion paper, we talk about nutrient composition for several LDFs. Here I just present a few examples. LDFs provide high quality protein, as indicated by the digestible indispensable amino acid score. Eggs and milk exceed 100% as compared to 37% in rice and 45% in wheat. LDFs provide essential fatty acids, such as docosahexaenoic acid and long-chain fatty acids in the appropriate ratios for human biology and metabolism. LDFs are, in fact, animal source foods, I should say, are in fact the only source of vitamin B12 in our diets. They also provide highly bioavailable vitamins A, D, choline, among others, as well as minerals, zinc, iron, and selenium. We can't forget, however, the thousands of bioactive factors that have yet to be discovered or have already been linked to some health outcomes, such as TMAO, that are found in livestock-derived foods. Next slide. This slide just gives an illustration of the importance of bioavailability of LDFs. You can see that the packaging matters enormously for the efficiency of absorption. For an infant or a young child who have small stomachs, this is very important. Vitamin A is a good example. In LDFs, it's provided as retinol, which is absorbed between 12 and 24 times the rate, depending on the type of carotenoid in a plant-based food. This is also true for iron, delivered as heme iron, absorbed at 2 times the rate. Zinc and choline, there's less evidence at this point. So you can see in the illustration that this is a lot of carrots to consume in relation to animal source foods. Next slide, please. In the UN discussion paper, we cover the epidemiology of LDFs as relates to human health. Here in broad brushstrokes, I'm giving you just an overview of that epidemiology. In adults, there is evidence that shows processed meats have been linked to colorectal cancers, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. Red meat as well has been shown to be associated with some of these poor health outcomes. No association has been shown within or inverse for poultry. However, as a dietary risk factor, red meat consumption ranks quite low in terms of disability-adjusted life years compared to other risk factors. It's a different story in infants and young children. Systematic reviews have actually showed that animal source foods are critical for growth and development. A Cochrane review found some evidence for this in increasing height for age Z-score. As well, another systematic review showed a reduction in stunting. In school-age children, there's a very well-known study that occurred in Kenya where cognitive function was improved as well as growth. But on the other end of the nutrition spectrum, it has been shown to increase the risk of overweight and obesity. The evidence in pregnant and lactating women is actually quite minimal. Fish intake has been studied more often because of the comparative risks in contamination versus no intake on offspring neurodevelopment. Next slide, please. So in summary, there are different consequences across the life course, both positive and negative, potentially. If consumed in moderation and as part of a diverse diet, LDFs can have important effects on bone health, cognition, and growth through the life course. Next slide. Moving now to sustainable livestock production. Next slide. In the UN discussion paper, we handle both the challenges and opportunities in terms of sustainable livestock production. Livestock production does contribute to greenhouse gas emissions at about 14.5%, largely through feed production, enteric fermentation of ruminants, manure storage, processing, and transport, as well as fresh water use, although most of this is returned to the water cycle. There are biodiversity losses associated with feed production, loss of top predators, extensive grazing, as well a narrowing of local livestock species and breeds. However, these numbers are controversial, as Dr. Smith first mentioned. The data largely comes from OECD production systems. Production, processing, and supply environments vary. Next slide. On the other side of the argument, however, there are opportunities for sustainable livestock production we need to pay attention to. For example, mixed production systems produce half of the world's food. And in these systems, Livestock provide draft power, manure, enriched soil biomass, and edible crop pots can be used for animal feed. Efficiencies can be gained through improvements in feed conversion rates in chicken and pigs, animal health, quality feed, and herd management. Use of appropriate animal breeds is another way to reach sustainable LDF production. And finally, very importantly, protecting animal health through the One Health approach can combat zoonotic disease and enhance animal health. Next slide. Moving now to conclusions. Our key messages in the UN, key messages in the UN discussion paper are the following. Implications of LDFs depend on context, life course phase, and production system. Undoubtedly, nutrition inequities prevail globally, notably in LDF apparent dietary intake patterns. LDFs provide critical nutrients in highly bioavailable matrices. Thus, these powerful foods essentially can have vital impacts on human health, both in abundance and in scarcity. We need to ensure that LDF have access is there for children, pregnant and lactating women, and the elderly. LDF production can have serious impacts on the environment, but opportunities exist to mitigate climate change and environmental impacts through sustainable production. Ultimately, we need to rebalance food systems, support sustainable mixed production systems to safeguard human, animal, and planetary health. Next, I move very quickly through the action steps we propose in the UN discussion. In the first dimension of an enabling environment, food systems should espouse fair trade principles, sound environmental practices, and access to diverse and high quality foods. Economic and political strategies can protect the affordability of LDFs in some populations, and yet create disincentives to overconsume in others. Policies should ensure people have access to LDFs at critical life stages. Social and behavioral change strategies are needed to increase awareness on the importance, but also the risks associated with LDFs. Food-based dietary guidelines set appropriate quantities of LDFs, drawing on locally available biome-based foods. Next slide. In the next dimension of planetary health, we can mitigate environmental impacts of LDF production by supporting mixed farming systems, production systems adapted to local contexts, and transition some systems to sustainable animal types, such as monogastric animals and products, eggs, or dairy. Finally, we should ascribe to the One Health principles, support small and medium scale producers. That should be integral to solutions, women farmers with a focus on production inputs and animal health, credit, and extension services. Efficiencies can be gained through improved feed conversion rates and use of local breeds. Next slide. In terms of research, we can test LDF interventions and health outcomes across all vulnerable groups, investigate approaches to optimizing both biodiversity and diet diversity by blending the disciplines of ecology and public health nutrition. Furthermore, we should explore the bidirectionality of climate change and LDF production further. UN nutrition can play a leading role in orchestrating this concerted effort among members to achieve policy coherence and innovation. ILRI and others in the CGIAR system are committed to the UN Decade on Nutrition and working to ensure availability, access, and affordability of LDFs globally. Next slide. Thank you very much to all the co-authors and contributors to the UN discussion paper. Very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I mean, we have been together discussing, developing the paper, but when I hear you presenting it like this in one go, it really, silences me again, the wealth of the evidence that is out there. So thank you so much for your clear and comprehensive and still a summary of the paper. So please, everyone, read the paper. And just listening to you, just highlighting a few of the issues, there is not this silver bullet or even a golden bullet. No one size fits all. As you put correctly, context matters. It depends on where we are in the life course, the phase of our life course. It depends on the production system. And I really liked how you finished by stating rebalance the production and the consumption. And this is what I mean when we also say we can foster good nutrition and promote sustainable production of this type of food, but we need to look at it in one package, not one or the other. It's and. And of course, rebalancing calls for a multi-sectoral, multi-pronged approach that includes policy reform. It includes the opportunities of food-based dietary guidelines that can really help consumers understand what is a healthy diet and what are the sustainability criteria that go hand in hand with a healthy diet. It entails social and behavioral change strategies and programs. And this, of course, will help and should help the vulnerable groups like pregnant women, young children, adolescent girls, the elderly, as you pointed out, and access these nutrient-rich foods in low resource settings, while at the same time safeguarding the health of other populations who are sometimes over-consuming. So read the paper, but also do not forget, our dear audience, to type your questions in the Q&A box. I already see quite a few questions coming on, and I also see that some of the panelists are already starting to type answers in the Q&A box, so please keep an eye on it. I encourage you to type answers and questions. I'm sure we will not be able to answer all of them live, so it's good that we already have a few answered in writing as the session moves on. So please continue using the Q&A box. But now I really like to continue and introduce our panelists. And we will start with Joyce Najoro. I'm very happy to have Joyce on the panel, who is the lead technical specialist on nutrition and social inclusion at the International Fund for Agric Development, IFAD. She is committed to improving interagency collaboration on nutrition. That's how we know her. And she also serves in that capacity on the UN Nutrition Steering Committee. Joyce, you have so much experience in multi-sectoral nutrition governance, rural development, and community-based approaches, including through the famous REACH initiative. Joyce, I also would like to thank you because you were one of the many people that without any doubts, put your energy and your valuable contributions into this discussion paper. So thanks again for that. So please, tell us a little bit about the work that is underway to mainstream nutrition and IFAD's livestock programs. And in your opinion, in your view, how can the implication of this paper that we just discussed, how can this paper be applied to IFAD's investments portfolio and non-lending activities? Joyce, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stineke, and I'm very happy to be here among these distinguished panelists. I'm particularly very grateful to UN Nutrition for developing this paper. It is invaluable not only for IFAD, but also for other institutions that intend to create a nexus between livestock programs and nutrition. And while IFAD nutrition-sensitive investments have focused on fruits, vegetables, cereals, poultry, and small livestock, we see that there's a scope for increasing nutrition-sensitive investments in animal source foods and also raising awareness on the net benefit of consuming rather than just selling them. And IFAD's approach to nutrition has focused on nutrition-sensitive agriculture and food systems in order to provide safe, affordable, and nutritious foods. Entry points are identified to integrate nutrition into IFAD investments areas, which range from value chains, rural finance, natural resource management, and community development. And out of all the livestock-related investments, 41% are nutrition sensitive, meaning they provide targeted support for households to improve their nutrition. These include dairy, pastoralism, livestock development, range management, small stock, among other types of investments. And livestock contributes to nutrition through several pathways, as has just been mentioned. And one of them is own production, which contributes to increasing consumption of animal source foods, milk, meat, eggs. Also, the manure from livestock can be used to grow nutritious crops such as vegetables and fruits, and also promoting diversified diets such as integrated home gardens. And we also see that additional incomes derived from the sale of livestock and livestock products enable households to purchase food to diversified family diet, pay for healthcare, and other expenses contributing to better nutrition, such as hygiene and sanitation. School feeding programs also provide a good entry point for livestock investments. Project beneficiaries receive additional income by selling their produce to schools, and the meals served to pupils are enriched with animal source foods that are affordable and most times also culturally accepted. And I would not want to go without talking about the role of women. Women make up the majority of poor livestock keepers, and around 2/3 of the 600 million poor livestock keepers are women. And most of these live in rural areas, and these are the people that we work with. So in Asian intensive livestock systems, more than 3/4 of livestock-related tasks like feeding, taking care of young and sick animals, milking, are the responsibility of women. And in India, the livestock industry is dominated by women, and 93% of people employed in dairying are women. In Pakistan, poultry, sheep, and goats are often the only source of income for women that is fully controlled by them. So a rural woman would work maybe 15.5 hours a day, spending 5.5 hours on caring for livestock, but only 50 minutes on caring for her own children. So you can imagine what this means for nutrition. And we see that also use of biogas for energy can reduce time used to collect wood, and time saved by women can also in care practices for both for children and also for women themselves. And we see that although the role of women in livestock production can be considered to be at least almost equal to that of men, their contribution has remained underestimated, undervalued, and widely ignored. So the pass-on gift system that is promoted by HEFA International and implemented in several IFAD-funded projects around the globe is a very good example of women empowerment and nutritional potential of small livestock in rural societies. Every HEFA project beneficiary passes on livestock offspring, inputs, training, and practical skills they gained from the project to others in their community. And the practice transforms the community members from a position of beneficiaries to donors. And I want to give you an example of this pass-on gift process. In Haiti, the project beneficiaries passed on offspring from their project, provided goats and chickens, as well as knowledge from their hygiene and sanitation trainings. And this practice, at a minimum, doubles the impact of the original gift and also promotes useful messages for nutrition. I'd also like to give you another example of the Kenya Livestock Commercialization Project. This is a newly devised project which aims to contribute to the government of Kenya's agriculture transformation agenda by raising the incomes of poor pastoralist households in an environmentally friendly manner. The project focuses on small ruminants, local improved breeds of poultry and beekeeping, which have the potential to provide productive employment and the food security opportunities for women, youth, and marginalized segments of the population. It seeks to engage women and include interventions to protect, promote their nutritional status, decision-making, and overall gender empowerment. It also incorporates nutrition behavior change communication to promote dietary diversification, including the consumption of nutrient-rich foods such as dairy, meat, and milk. So I'll stop there, but saying that the content of the paper really would guide the design and implementation of projects at IFAD, and also help us with advocacy to convince the governments on why we need to invest in livestock-based investments. Thank you very much, and over back to you, Stineke.
Thank you so much, Joy. It's always a pleasure listening to you. And thank you specifically for highlighting two things. One, the dietary diversity, which is so important. And then second, but not second, maybe first, highlighting the role of women in livestock production and the role of women in agriculture overall, and how the role of women in itself is also a pathway to better nutrition for all. So thank you so much for these two highlights, but also for the very, very compelling practical examples of the work of IFAD. So let's continue to our next panelist, Gronia from UNICEF, Gronia Molony. She is a senior nutrition advisor at UNICEF in New York headquarters, where she's leading on young child diets, covering topics such as breastfeeding, which is also an animal source food, right? Complementary feeding and micronutrient deficiency. Previously, Gronia worked for both UNICEF and FAO in East Africa, so that was before joining in New York. Recently, UNICEF has devoted increasing attention to food systems, and given the importance of livestock-derived foods in complementary feeding, please, Gronia, tell us a little bit about the exciting efforts that UNICEF is promoting on the ground in Kenya and Nigeria. What trends do you observe between the consumption of livestock-derived foods in early childhood and wasting levels? Please, over to you, Gronia. Looking forward.
Thank you so much, Sinika, and it's wonderful to be on this panel with such great speakers. And I'm delighted to be speaking with you all on such an important topic. And we really need to think about fundamentally the role of livestock-derived foods in tackling child malnutrition. As despite great achievements in tackling child malnutrition in the past, we have a lot more to do. Currently, the world faces a triple burden of child malnutrition, undernutrition in the form of stunting and wasting, widespread micronutrient deficiencies, and a growing prevalence of overweight and obesity. And the poor quality of children's diets is the main driver of this triple burden. With globally less than half of our infants under 6 months of age exclusively breastfed, and a shocking 2 in 3 children aged 6 to 23 months not even being fed the minimum diverse diet needed to grow, there are multiple determinants and drivers of breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices. Yet for some reason, these issues have really not been widely picked up as part of the Food System Summit discourse so far. And I really hope today that we can raise these issues and make them central to our discussions. So there are opportunities as the food system bears critical responsibility for the nutritional quality, safety, availability, and affordability of children's diets. A key opportunity is with the promotion of livestock-derived foods, which provide key nutrients essential for the growth and development of our youngest and our most vulnerable children. So I wanted to share with you 2 ongoing examples of programming that aim to improve the quality of complementary feeding in young children using livestock-derived foods. I will start with the importance of livestock milk in complementary feeding alongside breast milk, given there is increasing evidence that dairy protein has an important stimulating effect on linear growth or height, and that it is also effective in promoting weight gain in children with wasting. Further, studies on cow's milk and linear growth show an effect in children in both developing and industrialized countries, suggesting that milk has a growth stimulating effect even when nutrient intake is adequate. Relatedly, many of you may be familiar with the Milk Matters study led by Tufts University from 2008, where it was reported that in many of Africa's drylands, young pastoral children obtain up to 2/3 of their daily energy intake from milk. Therefore, in households that are heavily dependent on livestock products for their livelihoods, a declining availability of forage is directly correlated to a decline in child nutritional status, given that these animal products, particularly milk, but also to some extent meat and blood, form such an essential source of food for pastoralists. So therefore, when we are experiencing severe droughts, we are reducing access to that nutrient source. And tragically, this has meant that prevalence rates of wasting exceeding a shocking 30% during times of severe drought are experienced in many countries, and specifically for this case study in northern Kenya, in the arid and semi-arid counties of Marsabit, Turkana, and Mandera. Therefore, given that this was a persisting issue, in 2018, under the leadership of the Kenyan government, with funding from USAID, UNICEF and FAO, in partnership with Concern and Washington State University, conceptualized the Livestock for Health study. The study investigates the effect of the provision of livestock feed or fodder, combined with nutrition counseling and access to services, on reducing seasonal spikes in wasting in children under 5 years of age and pregnant and lactating women during the dry season in Marsabit. The study also aims to estimate how these interventions impact stunting and underweight in children and weight gain for pregnant women by collecting data on middle upper arm circumference, height, weight, and weight gain during pregnancy every 3 months over the year. In addition, data on food consumption patterns, such as number of meals taken, type, diversity of foods consumed, including animal source foods, frequency of times and quantity of specific foods consumed on at least a 6 weekly basis is collected. The research is conducted over a 2-year period, and it will be instrumental in influencing future programming, especially for pastoral livelihoods, in ensuring sustainable milk production, access, and consumption throughout all seasons, and hence tackle malnutrition in young children and pregnant and lactating women, ultimately protecting children's right to nutrition and from them becoming wasted. The findings that are due in early 2022 will also strengthen advocacy for the prevention of the child wasting agenda through cost-effective approaches that do not undermine pastoral livelihoods, including through the National Drought Emergencies, Ending Drought Emergencies policy of the government, and also that can be replicated in similar drylands elsewhere. A second example comes from Nigeria in Kano State, where UNICEF, in partnership with the state government and the Society for Women's Development and Empowerment, are implementing innovative approaches to enhance the diversity of young children's diets. The specific project aims to address malnutrition in children aged 6 to 23 months by improving the diversity of their diets through livestock and poultry farming and home vegetable gardening, in partnership with 28 mothers groups. The intervention was prioritized for this population given the 2018 Nigerian Demographic and Health Survey report revealed poor infant feeding practices in Kano, including low dietary diversity, minimum meal frequency, and minimum acceptable diet for children aged 6 to 23 months. The survey also found low consumption of meat, dairy, and eggs in these populations. Therefore, through this project, each mother's support group of 15 members receives 3 goats for rearing, and chickens are distributed to all for poultry farming. The mothers also receive seeds for fruit and vegetables, and they access weekly visits from the agricultural extension workers, teaching them how to take care of their livestock and farms, as well as receiving counselling on optimal infant and young child feeding and nutrition. The success of this project has ignited social change in many communities, with some mothers now making voluntary contributions to buy more goats, and the traditional leaders in Gala and Rimi have also provided free land to local support groups for farming. It is hoped that in the next DHS survey, we will see positive nutrition outcomes for these populations. So these are just 2 examples, but there's so much more that can be done. And the UN Food Systems Summit is a vital opportunity to champion children's nutrition at the highest level and identify new solutions and strategies, such as using livestock-derived foods that will deliver progress towards achieving the SDGs. Thank you, and back to you, Stinika.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gronya. Also, thank you for bringing us back to the opportunities that the UN Food Systems Summit will provide us later this year. But thank you also, of course, for sharing these very, very interesting and powerful country examples from Kenya and Nigeria, speaking to the role of research, especially in support of children's health and including also fragile and conflict-affected contexts. So this is really a very good addition again, highlighting the role of research, but also further research on the evidence base of livestock-derived foods within sustainable healthy diets. Thanks so much. Let's continue with the next panelists. Ms. Emma Naluyima Mugerwa, who is an award-winning innovative farmer with proven skills in animal and crop husbandry. Among her many previous assignments, she worked on the presidents of Uganda's personal dairy farm. Emma, the paper talks about how integrating farm-to-fork solutions could optimize opportunities and offset risks so that livestock-derived foods can better contribute to healthy diets that are sustainable and equitable. You're an award-winning farmer in Uganda. So how can the report's recommendations be directly applied on your farm, Acre Unlimited? Emma, over to you.
Thank you, Tenke. And it looks to have invited me on this important discussion. It actually looks like I've already embraced the recommendations. So I've already embraced the recommendation in this paper. And on my farm, this is what I do on my farm. I practice integrated farming, and I raise pigs on one quarter, I raise cattle on another quarter, I grow matoke, that's our staple food, on another quarter, and I produce fish, vegetables, and fruits on another quarter. Now, in the process of doing integrated farming, integrated farming ends up improving our livelihood. And I'm going to give an example, like we improve nutrition, we grow the pigs, and then we get chickens, we get eggs, we get all this. Now, on my one quarter, I produce dung, and this dung helps me in so many ways. I play with it, and when I play with it, I play with the life cycle of a housefly. And in this life cycle, I'll produce maggots that I'm going to feed the chickens. And the chickens, if they are broilers, they're going to give me meat. If they are layers, they're going to give me eggs. And then I also introduce earthworms in the dung of the pigs. And then in the process, the earthworms eat on the dung, and then it turns into humus. But as it does that, it produces a certain liquid called vermiliquid, which has satanis that acts as a pesticide. And then also, I'll use the rest of the dung. If I haven't used it with the maggots, I'm going to use it to produce biogas. And then I do all this before I produce my pulp. Then on the second quarter, those are my lovely pigs. On the second quarter, I produce, I raise cattle. And this cattle, I'll still use either the dung that I used the dung from the pigs that I used, that I got from the earthworms. I'll use it to grow the maize, and then I'll use the maize to feed the cattle as silage. And then I produce enough milk for myself, for the children at school, because we have a primary school, or even for my family. And I can sell the rest to the community. So in the process, I'm having nutritious food for my family and the community, but I'm also going to get money. That money can help me buy other things that I don't produce on the farm. And then on the third quarter, and then in this biogas, now we are talking about, if you recall, Smith talked about climate change issues, and we cut a lot of trees. Like in Africa, almost everyone in every home, they will use charcoal or firewood to produce, to cook. So in the process, because we have biogas, we produce biogas from the dung. So that means we are not going to cut, we're not going to cut trees. And then we are actually reducing the carbon print of the dung, the carbon print produced by the livestock. So in the process, we produce biogas, and then we use it for energy and lighting. But the slurry, again, the byproduct of the biogas, we use it again in the garden. So I end up having organic food. I end up having, and yet at the same time, I've enabled to reduce or mitigate the climate issues that would have come by cutting down trees. And then on the fourth quarter, I'll produce fish. And this fish we do aquaculture. So this fish, as I'm producing it, and remember, I use the pig dung to produce earthworms and maggots, and I'll use the same maggots to feed the fish because they need protein. So I'll use the same maggots to feed the fish, and the maggots and earthworms to feed the fish. And the beauty is that as the fish are eating, because we need to change water every 14 days from the smart pond rates, from the smart ponds we use for the fish. That means the water we use is also the water from the fish has nitrogen, and this water is again used in the garden. So my farm everything is interrelated, and one thing leads to the other. So the water that comes from the fish goes to the matoke and the vegetables, and then I reduce on the expenditure I would have used to buy inorganic fertilizer. And then I also have, I do hydroponics as well. So that I do hydroponics as well. So, and the hydroponics helps me again to reduce on my cost of production, and I still feed the cows and the pigs and the chickens. So it's a cycle of everything.
Great, Emma. Indeed, you are walking the talk, as we say. You have been implementing the recommendations of the paper, not just this paper, I would say, but I think you have also been reading sneakily the aquatic food paper you and Nutrition produced and published just before this one, because you had a hint to that paper as well. So that's very interesting. I would have loved to ask you follow-up questions on supporting policies for integrated farming that you are in fact already doing, but I'm afraid we are a little bit behind schedule. So please forgive me if I go immediately to the next speaker now, who is Lana Weidgenant. I'm so sorry for the pronunciation of your name, so please feel free to repeat that. Lana is a young leader, and she is, despite her age, already the Deputy Director of Partnerships at 0 Hour, which is a youth-led climate justice organization with chapters all around the world. Lana also serves as the UN Food System Summit Vice Chair of Action Track number 2 on shifting to sustainable consumption patterns. In addition, she is a real food system youth ambassador. So Lana, please talk to us about the role of the youth in food systems transformation, including the efforts you are supporting in Action Track number 2 to shift to sustainable consumption patterns, particularly those related to livestock foods and derivative products. Please feel free to say something about yourself, and also make sure that all the participants are still active and awake, because I'm aware that we all of us have been listening a lot. So please enlighten us with your ideas.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm the young person speaking here today, so hopefully you can still stay a little bit awake to hear some of the youth perspectives. And as the youth representative, I need to emphasize how crucial it is to reduce the global level consumption of meat and other livestock-derived foods. As has already been said, of course, there are places where undernutrition is of concern and where livestock are providing nutrients to local communities that they cannot easily source elsewhere. This is very important. But also that cannot stop us from action in the other places and populations where the change is needed. There are too many webinars and other discussions, especially doing this work at the international level, where statements are not said clearly, and instead the entire conversation is that this is a complex issue. It differs by region, it is nuanced. Make no blanket statements, or in other words, don't make any statements without at least 3 disclaimers attached. So whether we want it or not, this complexity conversation can end up making us stuck in talk and stand in the way of urgently needed action. For when there is no clear statement, where are we to turn for clear action? So yes, let's acknowledge regional differences, nuances, how it applies to different communities. But let's make sure to not get stuck there. The truth is that high consumption of meat and dairy is contributing to the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the health crisis. And the truth is that the global north holds more responsibility in increasing their consumption of these products that's going beyond the planetary boundaries. Current consumption levels of meat and dairy are incompatible with a livable degree of global warming. That means that unsustainable diets are basically standing in our way of stopping the ticking time bomb on climate disaster. Young people are already leading the way in aligning our diets more with an environmentally sustainable and healthy future. But that weight can't rest on our shoulders alone. We need large-scale action on dietary change. And here are 3 concrete examples of what that looks like. One is incorporating more environmental sustainability considerations into the dietary recommendations that are made in each country, and then aligning the food that's served at public institutions with those environmentally considered recommendations. Another one is redirecting subsidies or government support so that it doesn't go into the same commodity crops that are often turned to animal feed and end up supporting intensive livestock agriculture, but rather making that government support go into practices like agroecology and also consumer access to crucial foods for sustainable, healthy diets like fruits, vegetables, pulses, and grains. And another one is a just transition, making sure that as this consumption practice shift happens, farmers are not harmed or left behind as a crucial group, but rather are supported to continue earning their livelihoods in the green economy. These three examples are some of the solutions that we have received from public input and have been strongly discussing in the Sustainable Healthy Diets team, or Action Track 2, at the UN Food Systems Summit. In Action Track 2, we are acknowledging the food system's complexity and taking that into account, but also moving forward with solutions to take to the summit. When we talk about consumption of animal products beyond planetary boundaries and to unhealthy degrees, we do not mean the indigenous practices or the small farmer who has a few livestock supporting his family. We need to make that clear. And at the same time, we need to reach the global North countries and affluent populations around the world with strong, urgent actions from governments, from businesses, and from a global movement of people demanding change and also making that change happen in our daily food habits. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Really interesting. And thank you so much for sharing your insights with regard to what's happening in Action Track number 2, shifting to sustainable consumption. It struck me when you said, this is a nuanced discussion. There's so many disclaimers. When you say something, you always have to say, but A, B, C, D. But then you continued saying, these disclaimers should not stop us from acting. And you pointed out, apart from these very concrete issues, food-based dietary guidelines, public food procurement, for example, for schools, just transition, very concrete. But you also pointed out the responsibility of northern countries, because of course, the panelists have alluded very clearly what is needed in some of the lower income countries and the need for vulnerable groups to have access to these nutritious foods. But then there is the other side also of overconsumption, specifically of some groups in northern countries. So thank you very much for also highlighting that aspect in the discussion. So let's move on now to our final panelist of today, Martina Otto from UN Environment, the head of cities unit at UN Environment. At the moment, Martina is also the interim head of the Energy and Climate Branch and the Secretariat of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. So Martina, she's also part of the UNEP's core team supporting the UN Food Systems Summit and the UN Task Force. Like Joyce, she is also a member of the Steering Committee of UN Nutrition, and she brings in valuable expertise in sustainable energy, transport, buildings, climate change, air quality, sustainable consumption and production. Martina, over to you for UNEP's perspective on livestock-derived foods and sustainable diets. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Stieneke, and I'm glad to join this panel, and really congratulations to UN Nutrition on the launch of this paper, which really touches upon all the critical issues. It does open up the conversations of difficult topics, but it also does walk the fine line of differentiated methods. And I would like to emphasize 4 points in this already quite rich discussion. And my first one was about balance, and I feel really awkward coming after Lana, starting with balance. But hey, it is what it is. I think we absolutely have to recognize that we need to balance what we eat. It is about diverse diets. It's not about finger pointing on one or the other food product. It is about diverse diets. It's just like in the ecosystem, the diversity makes the strength. So that's one. So recognizing all the nuances on this. The second is obviously the balance about the levels of consumption, recognizing those stark inequalities, and as Jimmy put it very well, the issue between no choice and good choice. but it's also a call for a balanced approach that does consider the environmental impacts. And we do know, and it was mentioned already, there are the impacts related to climate, to land use, and to water. And livestock production does generate 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and they're on the path of a steep increase if current trends persist. And there was already a question that came up in the chat, actually several. Does it even matter? Number one, it's mostly methane. Does that even, you know, it has a longer lifespan? Well, it still is around for 20 years, number one, and number two, the global warming potential is much higher. And we need all the actions to meet the Paris Agreement if we want to have a chance to stay within the 1.5 degree warming path. Then we need to act on everything, and we can't just excuse one or the other sector because maybe the share is not as big as another one. So that's one. The livestock does use about 8 to 10% of global fresh water, and that's a third of the total fresh water used for agriculture, with the vast majority of this being used for feed production. And here, unlike greenhouse gas emissions, the location of land and water use does matter. So it's, again, part of the nuanced situation, but I think the water issue is a critical one as we run into water shortages here, there, and there. And then 3/4 of the global agricultural land is currently used to grow and feed livestock to provide 17% of global calories and 33% of global protein supply. So just to put things into perspective, and to put it further into perspective, obviously it's not an issue only of livestock. The entire food system, the global food system, needs to be transformed, and a One Health approach must be at the heart of this. Food systems impact biodiversity right now, with agriculture having been identified as posing a threat to 85% of species at risk of extinction. And what does this mean? It means the way we farm, consume, and dispose of food does affect not only the health of our planet, but our own health. Biodiversity loss does not just mean we lose the hero species we love, but it means we're fundamentally reducing the resilience of our ecosystems. And in doing so, we're cutting off the vital stream of life-supporting services they provide, and we're reducing thereby our own resilience. And for too long, we have looked at the issue from a perspective of trade-offs, and I heard it in discussion as well, trade-offs. But instead, we need to actively look for how we can achieve the synergies. We will need to embrace the complexities to seek out the win-wins. And it's not straightforward, it's not easy, but we have to really do it. And that takes me to the last point, and that's really that we need to collectively support the changes to both consumption and production patterns to embrace One Health. And that goes into the discussion of behavioral change, changing the global dietary patterns. It's a difficult discussion, yes, but we can't afford of longer shying away from it. And we just had another session right before this one, a global dialogue linked to the Food Systems Summit. And our executive director put it in a way that I thought was quite powerful. If everybody wants to eat steak every evening, and that at a population of 9 billion, and obviously we recognize not all of the 9 billion are actually going to be able to do so, afford to do so. But if you wanted to do that, it's not computing. And that's something I think we just have to keep in our minds. So we're not shying away from this discussion, but we're not finger pointing either, and we're trying to find solutions. I thought the report's findings were really good in that respect. It's about embedding the considerations into the food-based dietary guidelines, looking at the social and behavioral change strategies, looking at tools to increase awareness of people. It's not that everybody gets up and says, well, how can I harm the environment today? But it is about the awareness, what it does, and how we can actually do better. And there are the economic and political strategies that we need to safeguard the affordability of livestock-derived foods, as well as the livelihoods of the farmers. And it's really about taking our own responsibility as consumers. It's an area where we can all do something right now. We can vote with our forks in a sense, and take action. But it's also about protecting and setting aside land for nature, and it's about farming in a more nature-friendly and biodiversity supporting way. We heard some amazing examples here, and for many farmers, for many small farmers, and do not meet up already, how can we help them to make a better living while protecting the nature. That's also about One Health, putting people, planet, and prosperity together. Maybe I stop here. I'm pretty much have exhausted my time, I think. I'm happy to say a few words about the Food Systems Summit, what the discussion that just took place. So if we still have time in the discussions, if not, I encourage everybody to look at the the outcomes that are available publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina, and also thank you for stopping and remaining more or less within the time. And thank you for highlighting again, bringing us back also to Paris Climate Agreement, that it's not about doing one bit of the array of solutions, but doing and taking context into account, of course. Also, thank you for reminding us again that One Health approach is what we need to look for. Human health, animal health, planetary health, One Health, that is One Health cannot be separated from another type of health. So we have a bit of time to go to some of the questions that have been posted in the chat box. What I'll try to do is I'll try to give maybe one question to a panelist. So then I'll ask the panelists to be as brief and concise as possible in the answers, so that we will be able to wrap up the event just before, I will say a few closing words, just before 5 p.m. Central European time. So let me just pick one for Joyce from IFAD. Sorry, Joyce, to put you in the spotlight right now. But I see a question here from Sylvia Kaufmann, who says, livestock is key to good nutrition and livelihood security for many in the Horn of Africa. But given the scarcity of natural resources, how would you see the future of pastoralists under these conditions?
Thank you so much, Stineke, and for this question. And it is indeed very true to say that, and it's not only threatened by climate change, but very many other factors also, including conflict, population growth, and there's a lot of pressure also on the environment. So, and this is really going to affect the livelihoods of very many people. And some of the issues also are related to the policies. I mean, there is a lot also for the pastoralists to settle down. And this, of course, will affect their livelihoods. And in terms of what the future means, but we need also to look at how to ensure that we have the proper adaptation measures when it comes to addressing issues of climate change, taking up a bit of technology also to ensure that the productivity is improved. And this reduces the need of having very big herds, but able to produce adequate for home consumption, and also as building up the assets of the pastoralist communities. But indeed, I think we cannot continue in business as usual. We must be looking at new measures of maintaining the livelihood, but at the same time also looking at alternative livelihoods of measures to address.
Thank you so much, Joyce. That's very interesting and compelling, by the way. So let's move on to a next question for Laura. There's quite a few questions, obviously, for her, so it's difficult to choose. But a question here is that if we would improve production practices, would it actually be possible for us to provide the recommended daily intakes of key micronutrients that are exclusively provided by livestock-derived foods for our whole, but also our growing population, while at the same time staying within planetary boundaries? And while you address that question, I challenge you to say also a few words about this new, sometimes, fashion food, sometimes called fashion food, which is called lab food. If you would maybe weave that into your answer, I would be very grateful, if that's possible at all, Laura.
Sure. I think probably the answer to both of those questions is we don't really have the evidence base to answer that. I do think that if we were, as many of the speakers have talked about, if we rebalance consumption patterns and dietary patterns, it's very plausible that we can meet the needs of certain population groups with the current production systems that we have. So I don't know that anybody has actually done those calculations. It's a great idea to think about. It's a very complex question to answer, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And we need to, again, focus on certain segments of the world's population that are not getting enough of those bioavailable nutrients from LDFs. On the second question, it's interesting. I get this question often. I have debates in my own household about this issue, about plant-based meats and lab cultivated meats. And I think, number one, it's a luxury for many of us to even be talking about these kinds of foods. In most parts of the world, this is pretty unknown. But it is clear to me there is no evidence yet to support the value of them in terms of human nutrition. That doesn't mean that they can't be used for human nutrition. However, I want to say that we have tried for decades to mimic nature through infant formula as an example, and have not succeeded in terms of replicating what we find in breast milk. And some of this has to do with those bioactive factors. So I have my doubts that we can perfectly mimic meats in a lab or in a plant-based product in terms of the value, bioactive factors, and nutritional value. However, again, I also challenge people to consider the processing and the energy required for processing that's entailed, so that it's not this is a plant-based product, so this is better for the environment necessarily. So generally, the answer is the evidence isn't there. Let's wait and see as we move forward, but hard to compete with nature.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I think, yeah, the evidence is not there, but slowly and certainly we are learning more and more, of course, and also looking at context, looking at locality. So maybe that's where we should look for the evidence as well. And speaking of evidence, I'd like to ask the next question to the director of ILRI, a question from India, from Mamta Dhawan. Research in India on the role of women in livestock rearing and intra-household consumption patterns of animal source foods is very minimal. So the role of women in livestock. Can this be rectified in the coming times? Well, the director of ILRI, please.
I'm not sure that I agree entirely with the role of women is minimal. Women are very
the role
active
of research on the role is minimal.
Research, I thought you hear women. No, India is quite active in research. The dairy sector, not only on the aspects of the biology of livestock, such as dairy production and so on, but India has been very innovative as to how they get smallholders competitive in the markets by innovating around the supply chain, putting up in the rural areas coolers so that smallholders can bring their milk to coolers and have it stored and tested and so on, and be paid immediately as they deliver it. So
does that include the women specifically also? I see the research is ongoing, but what about the role of women? Is that doing research?
Yes, indeed. And in that system, women were the chief people who doing the marketing. So they participated fully in this. And in the dairy sector, in India, of course, is the biggest dairy producer in the world. And in a program called Operation Flood, over many years have transformed the dairy sector and made it very inclusive, including for women who are very, very active in it, not only in the marketing, but also in the processing of household products.
Thank you so much. I'm just browsing quickly through the questions, and I see there's a few on the Food Systems Summit. So I'd like to ask a question to Lana, and also I'd like to ask Martina to reflect on it, because you hinted, Martina, that you just came out of a session, a food system dialogue. So the question is here, there's so many people that are concerned that many of the ideas that are being promoted in actually that action track number 2 about transforming towards more sustainable consumption patterns, that these solutions are utopian wish lists rather than actionable, implementable concepts that will help feed, or I should say, nourish more people. Lana, would you take a first try, and then Martina, would you like to chime in as well?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to this one, especially as part of Action Track 2. So I think, first of all, addressing that Action Track 2 isn't focused on feeding more people, right? Action Track 2 is focused on a sustainable and healthy future. And with that in mind, these are the kinds of actions that we need in order to have a sustainable and healthy future. And I don't think it's utopian to say that, you know, we want to have a livable climate in 30 years. So if they seem out of reach, that's probably indicative of how far we are in terms of like the actions that need to be taken and status quo right now. So if anything, that just should alert us to how quickly we need to transform food systems and get that action back on track for, you know, food systems and climate as well.
Thank you so much. No utopian, actionable. Good. Martina, please, your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks very much. I also would like to add to exactly that one. There are several action tracks. There are 5 action tracks, and there are some cross-cutting issues. So don't expect everything to be dealt with under Action Track 2. It really focuses on the consumption aspects. I would join Lana absolutely by saying, if you don't dream it up, it ain't happen. So if we don't start coming out with those ideas, they will never materialize. So yes, some of them may feel out of reach, but if we don't start really putting them forward and work actively to have people join, well, whichever of the game changers is really coming out at the end, we won't be getting there. So that's one. The other one is, indeed, we did have a global dialogue today as a contribution to the Food Systems Summit, and it was one that focused on a whole variety of environmental issues, because we absolutely wanted to make sure that we firmly embed sustainability into the food systems dialogue. It's about sustainable food systems, not only food systems. And we keep forgetting that. That's why I was indicating this need for the win-wins and not the trade-offs, and so on. And we did have one session that looked at sustainable diets as an opportunity for farmers, and a whole lot of cool things came out, and thank you, Stine, for sharing that. And I thought there was one thing that was very interesting. Immediately the reaction was, but farmers produce food. They're not responsible for the diets. And I think, well, obviously there's some truth in that, but how can we empower farmers to seek actively those opportunities that are there? They somehow seem to have and I'm not saying that that's everybody, it's those who were actually in the call, but there seems to be a sort of self-restriction. And let's think more creatively about that to make them part of the whole system and not only produce food. Over.
Thank you so much. I love it when you say we have to look for the win-wins and not necessarily the trade-offs. Let's not be naive, but let's look for the win-wins and the actual opportunities that will bring the change we need. So I'd like to give the floor to Gronya to pick one of the questions of her liking. Please, Gronya, try to be as brief as possible, and then I'll also hand over for a last question to Emma, or the last takeaway message. Gronya, over to you.
Thanks, Danica. Yeah, I just wanted to refer to the question that came in on the issue of miscommunication on the risks of consuming egg yolk, and why in Africa now apparently there are concerns that people are throwing away the yolks, and that the UN needs to do more to communicate around the fact that obviously we're talking about different risks for different populations. So I fully agree, and this is the worry about targeted public health promotions being for certain populations and certain risks, then being applied to everybody. And obviously in the case of prevention of all forms of malnutrition, eggs are a vital source of nutrition for young children, providing essential micronutrients and protein. So we certainly would not be encouraging any discarding of the yolks. So I think it's up to us as the public health community to make sure that when these messages are going out, that they are targeted to the populations that it's intended for, and those at risk, and are not applied to everybody. So that's well taken, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gronya. Emma, did you see one question you'd like to respond, or would you like to share with us one takeaway message before I wrap up the event, because I realize you have not spoken yet.
Sorry, I had muted myself.
Don't worry.
So I'll take it on from the last speaker. Many a times with the misconception, and if we want to do something about the misconception, we need to train our learners. We need to train our children right from the families where they come from, right from even at school. And how are we going to train them? We are going to train them with providing the right food at home. And also when they come to school, we providing the right feeds. I'll give you an example. I own a school called MSC Junior School, and we give the children eggs, everything actually we produce from school. And then in our diets, we make sure, because we grow vegetables, so we make sure that every child on their food, on their meal, they have vegetables, a portion of the vegetables. And then the parent, after the child learning at school that we eat them, we train them at school that this is very nutritious. At home, the parent never really wanted to, the parent struggled to make sure the child eats the food, the vegetables. And the child was like, no, the vegetables are sour, I don't take them. But because when the child came to the school and we taught him that, oh, this is nutritious, we grow this food and it's nutritious, and the child even learned how to cook it. When he went back home, he embraced it, and the mother now no longer struggles to tell the child that, oh, look here, you need to eat the vegetables. Actually, the child always asks the mother, we have to have vegetables on a daily. So somehow, however much any other person comes to brainwash the child or tell this child that, oh, this is bad, the child has already learned it at home and at school. So in a way, we need to train our children either at home and at school to eat well. And also a takeaway from all this is that, like Martina said, it's making sure that we have we make sure we take care of the animals, the people, and the planet. And the only way we can do, of course, I'm a smallholder farmer, so I'll keep advocating for that. The only way I think we can do that, especially in Africa, because remember, Africa has the biggest arable land, but for some reason we have very small pieces of land. And the only way we can make sure that we help ourselves to produce nutritious food and produce it for ourselves and also to produce it for the world is to embrace integrated farming, to make sure that both the people who are producing the food and also the land they are producing it from is equally catered for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you for bringing it back, and thank you for highlighting that idea of misconception and to counter it with good communication. So just to add to this and to in an attempt to close and wrap up this session, communication is key. We need to know what are sustainable healthy diets, and we need to know and we need to understand, and that's what we did this afternoon or this morning, this evening, together with you. What is the role of livestock-derived products, foods, in sustainable healthy diets? It's so important in the life courses, specifically for very young children. But at the same time, there is this risk of overconsumption in other groups, and there are the environmental aspects, and that all boils down in this big question, how to go about livestock products. But I believe that the examples that were given in the discussion paper that was presented by Laura, I believe that the examples that were given by the several panelists today do give clear avenues how we can consume in a sustainable way moderate amounts of livestock-derived products and support small farmers in producing those products in a sustainable and responsible way. I liked also Emma, and you were the last panelist to speak now, so I'm quoting you. Sorry for that, or maybe that's good. The way how you again highlighted the One Health principle. Healthy people, healthy animals, healthy planet. That's important. That's what we're discussing about. And we can do it if we make use of the win-win-wins of the opportunities we heard this afternoon. So I hope that despite the complexity of the issue we discussed this afternoon, you still can walk away from this webinar with a more or less positive feeling, and will have the energy to read the paper and to communicate about it and to really contribute to the debate, the understanding of sustainable healthy diets and the need to transform and to transition towards sustainable healthy diets as a way to transform towards more sustainable food systems. So let me say a few words of thank you to specifically the colleagues at the World Health Organization for helping us to give the visibility of this important topic through the Health Talks platform. As part of the countdown towards the Food Systems Summit. Of course, a big thanks to our chair, Naoko Yamamoto, who has been running literally from one event to an opening, and despite all that, delivered the opening words. The colleagues, Holly Seduto, Alessandra Mora, Clio Apolito, Thomas Buendia, who worked behind the scenes to make this a successful event. And thanks to Shirley from ILRI, Michael, Cynthia, and others at ILRI for making this webinar possible. And of course, Laura, I don't want to stop without thanking you for your huge contribution to the paper, your effortless and your energetic way to proceed and to, you know, integrate the comments that came in from the colleagues. And, you know, thank you also finally to all the speakers, the panelists who have been very generous with your time participating in this event. So finally, the recordings of this event will be made available on the website of UN Nutrition, or let's say the landing page, as well as the slides. And of course, you are invited to make use of social media to further promote the messages of this event in your own networks. So thanks a lot. Have a lovely rest of the day, rest of the evening, rest of the afternoon, and hope to see you in a next meeting. Thank you so much.